Okay. Thank you. Good morning. I think it's still morning. It's my pleasure this morning to give you an update on an initiative that I've been having a lot of fun with. It's an initiative that really started getting its legs at ICCF21 when I gave a poster on the pilot project for this initiative. And I'll say more about the pilot project shortly. So here's the story. Cold fusion, LENR, was rejected by mainstream science within about a year or so after 1989. It became a pariah science. This has changed somewhat in recent years, but relatively few researchers have been entering the field. Mike McCoubrey talked about the need for new researchers this morning. And he also talked about what's going on with the long-term researchers. They're leaving the field one way or the other. This is represents a huge risk of loss of this research record, and which in my opinion and many others would be a tragedy, not only for the LENR field, but for humanity, given the importance of achieving this phenomenon as a benefit for humankind and for the long-term prospects of humankind. So here's the kind of an overview of the initiative. Obviously, the objective is primarily to mitigate this loss of LENR research, and it does so by capturing and preserving the records, maintaining all the throughout the ownership of the records by the researcher, and it by so doing, by maintaining retaining these records, it allows re-examination of them with new insights, with new developments in the field, what I call, and Ed Storms and I came up with this term, leaching the tailings. The initiative provides for design of individual projects for each researcher or participant. The pilot project that I'm about to tell you about began with Ed Storms, and the whole effort is based on a 10-year foundation of LENR contributions. My initial work in this field was in the area of public policy, both for promoting and supporting LENR for realizing its benefits, and then subsequently for dealing with the secondary impacts once it is realized. Here's an overview of the methods. Not rocket science. We collect, organize, document, and preserve the information. The foundational approach that I'm describing was developed in the Storms project, pilot project, and but the foundation is modified for each researcher because everyone is a little bit different. Usually begins with a professional biography. Nearly every participant, every researcher has a CV to start with, and then as we go into the project and uncover each piece of it, each component, we prepare a memorandum to document it. This record then is complemented with an interview, usually more than one interview, with a kind of a review of the trajectory of the participants' LENR research journey, so to speak. In order to gather the information, the components for the memos, and to conduct the interviews, it's almost essential to have at least one and maybe more than one on-site visit to get the complete record. Once we have the information and the interviews, we can then look, analyze it, and determine the timeline. What were the phases of the research, and then, of course, document it by preparing reports based on the interviews and the collection of the memos on the components. What are the components? Well, again, not rocket science. It's about what you would expect in the public record, publications, presentations from conferences like this one, the ICCF conferences. Many times, unpublished reports, oftentimes reports of progress to sponsors to demonstrate what's been going on in the researchers, in the investigators' lab. Electronic files on both current and legacy media. A lot of the electronic files, of course, are on current state-of-the-art computers, but there are also legacy media going all the way back to 3.5-inch floppies or zip disks in some cases, and CDs are also quite common. We have lots of hard copy records depending on the investigator, and then there's a description of the lab, of the researcher's laboratory, as well as the lab notebooks that come out of the research. Often there's the researcher has a pretty complete library of LENR materials, books, and journal articles, and conference proceedings, including ICCF conferences, American Physical Society, American Chemical Society, and so forth. By the way, we'll see these images in subsequent slides. A few words about the pilot project. I worked with Ed Storms for a number of years now. We worked initially on preparing proposals for a new laboratory, and then those proposals were not funded, and then we turned our direction in the to the idea of documenting his long, then 29 years of research, which was presented as a poster a year ago in Colorado at ICCF21. Ed's retired from Los Alamos National Laboratory. He received the Preparata Medal in 2005. The records that we found, that we prepared the memos for, are pretty much exactly what you saw in the last slide, starting with his professional biography, publicly available and unpublished reports, electronic and hard copy files. Ed's had a LENR laboratory going back to the days when he initially retired from Los Alamos. And along with Jed Rothwell's LENRcanner.org, I would say Ed has probably the best library of books and journal publications and journal articles and other publications that exist anywhere in the world. We have 3 sets of interviews with Ed. I interviewed him 3 different times, went through the narrative from beginning to end on his cold fusion work. And by reviewing the interviews and the collection of the components, it's clear that he had the research phases shown here, starting, of course, with Los Alamos, then with Eneco in Salt Lake City, Lou Larson at Lattice Energy, and then Kiva Labs working with Brian Scanlon. 3 reports for the 3 stages were prepared. Stage 1 was information collection. Stage 2 was organization. Stage 3 was documentation of what all we found, what exists, and as well as the transcriptions of the interviews, and then a summary report based on those 3 reports. The cutoff date for the initial pilot project was at the end of 2015, and we currently have a supplemental project underway to bring it up to date. Okay, since ICCF21, I've had the good fortune of having 6 additional participants agree to go through this process. They're listed here. I've got separate slides for each one. I mentioned the supplement project with Ed Storms, Tom Clater and Malcolm Fowler, both from Los Alamos, like Ed, retired. Skinner, Dave Nagel, Chino Srinivasan, Dennis Letts, and most recently, Mel Miles. Here's a picture of Tom Clater on the right, Malcolm Fowler on the left. This photo is taken at Tom Clater's lab in White Rock, New Mexico. Both, as I said, are retired from LANL. Clater received the Preparata Medal a couple of years ago. Their phases of research are fairly simplified here. They both worked for many years at Los Alamos. Clater now has a laboratory he calls High Mesa Technology. Malcolm Fowler has McFarland Industries, and they're currently working for a confidential client. Clater, in particular, did not use electrolytic cell method, which was the most common, of course, going back to the 1989 announcement. Instead, he used gas loading initially with neutrons and tritium as the signature, and then moved gradually with more investigation into gas plasma using tritium as the signature. While still at Los Alamos, Claytor in particular and Fowler also collaborated with many different people and continue to do so to some extent in their private laboratories. Some of the names that are shown here will be familiar to many in this audience. Their research record, as I said, they're similar to Ed Storm's. There are 3 sets of separate interviews where we went over the trajectory of their research, had professional biographies, publicly available documents, unpublished reports, electronic and hard copy files. We're going to see this again and again as we step through these various investigators, that the record have a lot in common, generally the same type of materials. Claytor has a pretty good LENR library. And here's a picture of Claytor's High Mesa Technology Lab in White Rock, as well, and a picture of Fowler's McFarland Industries, which is in nearby Espanola in northern New Mexico. Dave Nagel, a real producer in this field, a very strong participant and supporter of the field, was at Naval Research Laboratory in Washington, D.C. for 36 years. After he retired, he got a position, went to the George Washington University, where he still is very, very active in the field. And he's had a major role in research and other activities going back to the very beginning. This is a picture of Dave on the left with Ashram. It was taken when I was there last fall. Ashram and Dave have worked together in the field a lot over the years, going back to Naval Research Laboratory, and are now collaborating in Dave's lab at the George Washington University. Again, as a major contributor to the field, as you might expect, there's a huge research record that Dave has developed over the years. A professional biography, a couple of previous interviews have been included in his project. Many presentations, journal publications, and of course over the years has been a major contributor to articles in the Infinite Energy magazine. Probably the most electronic files of anybody that I've worked with so far, 150,000. 8 file cabinets full of hard copy materials, and a huge record for these ICCF conferences, as he has played such a major role over the years in the success of these conferences. He has 4 bookshelves shown in the previous slide, just to the right of Ashram. Those 4 bookshelves hold Dave's just his books. It doesn't include his papers that are in the file cabinets, I believe. Extensive, well, in the last few years, he's developed a very sophisticated LENR research lab. His 2 companies are shown here. NewCat Energy's been around for quite a while. LENRIA, Dave has developed with Steve Katinsky, LENR Industrial Association. LENRIA, of course, was the sponsor for ICCF21 last year. Chino Srinivasan was a picture of him shown with Martin Fleischman, probably taken, Chino's not real sure, probably at ICCF 15 when Chino organized that, the conference at Chennai in 2011, I believe. Chino did his initial work and his primary work while still at the Baba Atomic Research Center. So far, the components of his record includes a professional biography, publications, and unpublished reports. 2 previous interviews that were conducted. Chino and I hope to have another interview sometime during this conference. Chino has also done a very nice job of writing up the 6 phases of his LENR research during and then after his career at BARC before retirement. We've prepared a couple of volumes of the report for his project so far. This is the second volume, an oversized ring binder with the collection of his 44 papers that we've collected so far. Sidney Kimmel Institute for Nuclear Renaissance. This initiative, or this project under the umbrella of the initiative really began during ICCF21 when I had initial conversations with Dennis, and then have since then been to Columbia to work with Dennis. Since those conversations when we got the project started, then it was joined by Arik El-Boer, who is the lab manager, and most recently Graham Hubler has joined the team as well. It was in operation for the period shown here for about 5 or 6 years at the University of Missouri. Many people in this audience know the story about Skinner being derived or formed when Rob Duncan collaborated or worked with Sidney Kimmel to have the energetics technologies operation moved from Israel to Columbia, where it operated as Energetics Technologies USA for a couple of years, and then it was incorporated into the University of Missouri and became Skinner in 2012. So far, we've had interviews with Dennis, Arik, and Graham, and I should also mention that when the operations at Skinner came to an end at the end of, at the end of 2017, the records wound up pretty much with Dennis. The components that he has, again, professional biography, you see that in slide after slide or project after project. Many publications. A really important feature of this project is the annual reports that were prepared every year. The first one was by Rob Duncan, and then the remaining 5 were prepared by Graham Hubler for update to, or progress updates to Sidney Kimmel. Very sophisticated lab procedures for the main methods used at Skinner to achieve LENR. A number of different lab notebooks. Many of these actually go back to energetics technologies. Dennis has in his possession on the 3 external hard drives here over 30,000 files, but there are a lot of other older media, particularly CDs that exist in the record, and some 11 copies of hard copy materials, or 11 boxes. Dennis Letts has been another long-time researcher in the field. He has his Letts lab in Austin. He actually began in this field in 1990. We've had 2 sets of interviews of his research trajectory, and simply put, his research is in the phases shown here. His independent research in his small laboratory, particularly involving collaborations with others, going back to with SRI as well as Mike McCubre and Fran Tanzella, and then a lot of his collaborations have been with D2, Dennis Cravens, and Peter Hagelstein. And he's also now working for a confidential client. Although his previous emphasis in the early days was on electrolytic cells, currently he's focused on gas loading. He gave a paper at ICCF21 on their calorimeter development. Here's a picture of Dennis' lab in his backyard. It truly is a backyard laboratory. A face-on picture of the lab, and then it's the second picture showing its location in his expansive backyard behind his house in Austin. I've been there, being in Austin myself. We've collaborated very closely over the years in terms of just exchanging information. Dennis has a unique thing in his research record, the collection of papers that he accumulated when he first got started in this field. At that time, when the announcement came out in March of 1989, Dennis was still involved in gold mining in Bolivia. And so he came back home for a visit. He would come back periodically. He went down to the University of Texas Library and collected all the papers he could find at one of the libraries, and took them with him when he went back to Bolivia to continue his gold mining ventures, and actually studied up on the field and educated himself in the jungles of Bolivia. Story he loves to tell. Other things in his record are, of course, publications, unpublished reports, lab notebooks, electronic files. Those are not yet a part of this project, just a noting of their existence. And he has a few items in his LENR library. Most recently, Mel Miles has consented to be a part of this initiative. Mel had his early work at the Naval Air Warfare Center in China Lake. He began his work within a couple of days after March 23rd. He heard about it and he immediately went to his lab and started to work on electrolytic cells. As many people know, Mel is an electrochemist. He knew a lot about electrolytic cells and the phases of, he received the Truffle Prize, which was the prize before the Preparata Medal in 1999. The phases of his work are what he did at NAWC and then subsequently at the New Hydrogen Energy Lab. And then since then at Middle Tennessee State, at Bates College in Maine, and then in California, Laverne University. So far, we have 2 sets of interviews of Mel with his trajectory to complement the collection of the records. This is a picture of Mel in his backyard in his retirement home in St. George, taken earlier this year. The components of his records are very substantial. Professional biography, over 200 publications in this field, probably as many or more than anyone else that I'm aware of anyway. Because of his expertise and knowledge of electrolytic cells, he developed a close working relationship with Martin Fleischmann and developed an extensive record of correspondence. Much of that has been captured by Ruby, Carrot, and Jed Rothwell, and it's posted up on leonardcantor.org. For this project, we've identified a few additional items to incorporate. He has over 11,000 electronic files on his computers and on a set of about 35 or 40 CDs. His lab notebooks are one of the most meticulous set of notebooks you'll ever see anywhere. Very, very detailed recording, not only of his experiments while he was at NAWC and at New Hydrogen Energy, but for his entire research career, going well before the 1989 announcement. Very, very detailed log of his events, who he talked to, who he spoke with, what conferences he attended, and so forth. He has a pretty good LENR library, and a unique aspect of his record is about 40 VHS tapes in which are mostly his wife, Linda, would accompany him to the conferences where he would give papers or give presentations. She would record them, and then she would also record a lot of the presentations given by others at the same conference. And so these VHS tapes are now being digitized. I've gotten most of the unique ones digitized and are part of his record. So what have we learned? Well, I think it's fair to say I believe we have a sound foundation for what we're doing, but again, with a lot of flexibility required because every researcher is different. We have the basic foundation, but with a lot of flexibility. The use of memos to record the building blocks, I think, is well established as a good stepwise approach. The interviews are really necessary to complement the record that's being collected. And as I mentioned before, on-site visits are really necessary to get the interviews and to capture the record and prepare the memos. There's a huge variation, as you might expect, on the extent of records available, depending upon how much research was done, when it was started, how detailed the records were, whether they still exist, whether they're still available. Certainly, I would say that a lesson learned is the value of the research, which I'll say again here in a minute. Retention of ownership by the researcher is important. And thus far, although some people are working under NDA, the factors have not, these considerations have not been totally, particularly constraining. What's the future for this initiative? Well, there's a lot more that can be done with what we've already collected for each of these researchers. We have them available now for long-term reanalysis, again, as I mentioned, leaching the tailings. And of course, we can extend the scope to other researchers beyond the six, in addition to Ed. I've had discussions with a number of different people about potential participation in the future. For example, Dave Nagel and Graham Hubler and I have been talking about a similar project. In fact, we've actually gotten started on it for the Naval Research Laboratory. We'll continue to refine the methods and continue to respect and take care of value of research and intellectual property considerations. The question has come up, you know, how the records now exist in the, I have a copy and the individual researchers. Can we do better to make the records more secure, more permanent, and yet still the property of the researcher? One idea is a cloud solution, also potentially a library that's interested in this field may be a candidate. Initial indications are that generally when you leave a record or an archive with a library, they want money to help pursue it. So I'm also looking at the cloud. And ultimately, I like to have an integrated report of this initiative of the participants and their research records. I'd like to thank the Anthropocene Institute, Carl Page, for supporting this initiative. I'd also like to thank Dave Nagel for a gift for supporting the initiative, and I'd like to thank Jed Rothwell for maintaining the LENRCanada.org website, which makes these publicly available publications very easy to obtain. Okay, that's it. Questions?